heard according to the courtroom transcripts.
Now, during that conversation that you had with Miss Rowe, did she at any time during the course of that transcript describe the defendant as a good parent?
No, she didn't.
At any time during that conversation that you had with her over a year ago, did she describe him as a wonderful father?
No, she didn't.
At any time during the course of that interview with her over a year ago, did she describe him as a caring person?
No.
And does she at any time during that interview use the word generous to describe the defendant?
No.
During the course of the conversation that you had with Miss Rowe over a year ago, did she express to you during the course of that interview comments about her concerns of his parenting skills?
Objection leading.
Overruled.
Yes.
And in particular, what did she say?
Objection, opinion, relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
She referred to Michael as a sociopath and his children as being possessions.
Did she at other points during the conversation express any other areas of concern
Yes.
about the defendant and the children's relationship?
Yes, she did.
How many different areas did she talk about? Without going into the details of what she talked about, the areas, how many areas of concern?
I recall there were 3.
And did each one of those reflect negatively upon the defendant's parenting skills?
Objection leading.
Calls for a conclusion. Sustained.
Were those 3 areas discussed in the context of him being a good or a bad parent?
Yes.
And was it good or bad?
It was bad.
Okay, next, did Michael Jackson and Debbie Rowe have some sort of secret pact that outlasted their short marriage?
During the course of your interview with Miss Rowe over a year ago, did you discuss with her the topic of the truthfulness of her statements made during the time, the 9-hour interview that occurred at Mr. Schaffel's house?
Yes, I did.
And what did she say?
She told me that she had a plan since she got divorced from Michael in 1999.
Did she tell you who made the plan up?
Yes.
Who?
She and Mr. Jackson.
Together?
Yes.
All right. You told us all about the plan. Tell us what she said after the plan.
She said she...
Objection vague.
Overruled. You may answer.
That she stuck with her plan to talk positive about Mr. Jackson, as she's done throughout news conferences that she's had since they were divorced.
Did she indicate to you during this conversation whether those statements were true or false?
Yes, she did.
What did she say?
And she says that they were false.
All right, Ricky Sean Howard, we've got some what could be described as damage control, I think, by the prosecutor trying to impeach a witness. The problem is it's their own witness.
Well, the prosecutor was jammed up. There's no doubt about the fact that the prosecutor believed that Debbie Rowe was going to testify consistently with this witness, the detective Robel. Since she did not, and she testified, as we might say, on a frolic of her own, the prosecution could not let that stand. They had to get it handled, and they had to get it handled before the defense started.
But the problem I have, and just address this, Sean, with your comment, the problem I have is why wasn't this brought up during the cross-examination of Debbie Rowe? Wouldn't that have been the place to say, hey, didn't you tell Sergeant Robel a year ago, blah, blah, blah?
You would have thought, and I suppose this is impeachment, but maybe I'm nitpicking. It seems still to be different from what Sneddon said she would say, which is that it was completely scripted. This is somewhat different from that, and this does not mirror Janet's scripting testimony, which is what Sneddon said it would do.
Right, Howard?
Well, yeah, it was a brilliant impeachment of irrelevant and meaningless testimony.
Well, at the very least, an issue that's not central.
Well, not only it wasn't relevant. I don't think it had anything, again, to do with the charges. And you know what? Where was the tape recording of this conversation? I mean, this is a he said, she said. Great strategy. Call a witness and then call another witness to impeach the witness you called.
Well, they're jammed up. They had no choice. And if there is no tape recording, which we assume there is not, or else we would have heard it, and that many police departments do not tape witness interviews for a whole host of reasons, they had to fix this. And they had to fix it fast.
Absolutely. But I still wonder, even with the limited effectiveness given Howard Weitzman's assessment of this cross-examination or this impeachment of this witness, wouldn't it have been more effective if you had asked Debbie Rowe these same questions when she was still on the stand?
Yes.
Now, thank you. On to cross-examination. Did the former Mrs. Jackson tell the police everything?
But there are things she said in open court that you didn't ask her about in your interview, correct?
Correct.
She said Michael Jackson was generous in open court. Do you remember that?
Yes.
You never asked her if Michael Jackson was generous, did you?
I don't recall asking that.
She said that Michael Jackson was her friend, correct?
Correct.
You never asked her in your interview if Michael Jackson was her friend, right?
I don't recall asking that.
In fact, at one point in your interview, she said she wasn't really supposed to talk a lot about Michael Jackson because her lawyer had advised her as such, right?
Correct.
And when she said that to you, you didn't ask her a lot of questions about Michael Jackson as a person after that, right?
She volunteered some of the stuff.
Now, at the particular point in time when you interviewed Debbie Rowe, she was rather upset about their family law proceeding, true?
No, I don't think that's correct.
Do you remember she said to you, "Officer, I have Michael's Achilles tendon. I have the kids. I don't have them, but I'm going to have them." Do you remember that?
I remember something to that effect.
Isn't that what she told you?
She did, Mr. Mazzaro, but I don't believe that her child custody issue was going on at that time.
All right, we move on. Assistant District Attorney Gordon Auchincloss next goes on to do some number crunching with a forensic accountant. His name is John O'Brien. The question is the King of Pop's empire crumbling?
All right, going back to your consideration of this particular balance sheet, tell us what it said in terms of Mr. Jackson's assets versus liabilities at that particular date.
This showed that as of June 30th, 2002, there was $130 million in assets, $415 million in liabilities, and a negative net worth of $285 million.
If you would, please tell us about the opinions you formed based upon your review of all the financial documents you've described that were in these boxes that you reviewed.
Well, based on the information we saw, Mr. Jackson's financial condition had been deteriorating up and leading into February 2003, evidenced principally by a significant amount of over-expenditure over what was being made. In other words, expenditures exceeded income. Secondly, that the liabilities, the obligations side of things, the obligations and liabilities were increasing steadily and fairly significantly. And lastly, there appears to be an ongoing cash crisis. You'll see a number of the memos that we looked at that talked about cash crisis, not enough cash to pay bills, etc. And then lastly, I believe that information, based on the documents that I've seen, was certainly known as of February of 2003.
All right, I want to get to this accounting issue, but I really want to go back because we're going to be looking at this witness for a little while. Let's finish up with Debbie Rowe. On cross-examination of this police officer, one, we're dealing with the issue of parenting skills, with which, Howard, I think you make an appropriate point. What really does that have to do with the molestation charges, with the other charges? It's sort of a side issue. But isn't there a big hole there, Ricky, with respect to the question that the district attorney asked this officer? Okay, you've told us all about this plan, the supposed plan that Debbie Rowe sticks to
We don't know what the plan is.
Exactly.
We just don't know what the plan is, and it's bizarre because neither side wants to find out what the plan
I think
is.
there was an objection about the plan that was sustained. They wanted to go into the plan, but the defense said no objection, and the court sustained it. So
well,
we don't know about the
and
plan.
you would think that it would have been admitted if it had something really to do with the charges.
Let me say this.
Hold that thought, Howard. Hold it. When we return, will the forensic accountant pass his test in Mesro Math 101? Stay with us.
The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back. Prosecutors called a forensic accountant to the stand to bolster their theory that the King of Pop's deep financial problems created panic in the Jackson camp. But defense attorney Tom Mesro, it's no surprise, say that the accountant's numbers just don't add up. If it doesn't compute, you must commute. Okay, I apologize for that. Here's what the jurors heard according to the courtroom transcripts.
Do you have any knowledge of what Mr. Jackson was offered to do, either national or international music tours between the years 1999 and March of 2003?
No.
Did the prosecutor give you any documents about licensing opportunities for various Michael Jackson-related products that he was offered between the years 1999 and March of 2003?
I don't recall seeing any of those. There could be some in there, but I don't know that that would be relevant to my calculations.
If you were trying to solve a liquidity crisis like you've identified here, wouldn't it be relevant if you knew that Mr. Jackson could accept one opportunity and solve it in a day?
Well, it could be relevant, but it isn't in this calculation because that liquidity crisis was real. There were documents. There are documents throughout that we reviewed that there was a serious cash crisis. And if it could have been solved, why wasn't it? I mean, there were documents that there's $10 million being unpaid. There's documents where vendors are threatening lawsuits. If it's that easy to fix, why don't you fix it?
Okay. Now, how wealthy is the King of Pop? Defense attorney Tom Mesereau questions the accountant about Michael Jackson's biggest asset. How can you be broke if you own the Beatles?
Sir, if Mr. Jackson's interest in the Sony ATV catalog went from $47 million in 1986 to selling half of it for $90 million in 1995, and then was estimated, the entire catalog was estimated at $1 billion in 2003, based on the document you saw, how can you say it's diminishing in value?
Because when you look at the way the money gets dispersed to the partners on the sale, and you look at how much money has been advanced to Mr. Jackson over the years, he gets $6.5 million guaranteed every year on that. While that's going on, Sony should be getting $6.5 million, and they're not. So that means that they are, in fact, accruing a liability on an annual basis. In addition to that, Sony is making substantial investments in additional copyrights expenses, which Mr. Jackson is not contributing to, so that liability increases.
Well, this guy is painting a pretty dismal picture.
Am I missing something? Is this the motive for the child molestation and the false imprisonment? That's what this is?
No. This is to make sure the jury understands that Michael spends a lot of money, squanders his money, and is financially responsible, according to somebody who clearly, in my opinion, doesn't understand the business.
Let me just do this.
Before you chime in, Ricky, let me explain that comment. He doesn't understand the business. Why?
Well, because you have a catalog like this, it's valueless. That is, it's worth more than $1 billion. It depends how it's marketed. You know, you can create all kinds of new products.
It's not a matter of hard and fast numbers on a sheet of paper, in other words.
This is somebody who's been hired by the government to complete a mission, and he's trying very hard to do that.
All right, so be it. If he's hired by the government to complete the mission to show that Michael Jackson was in severe financial straits at the time of the Bashir documentary and his empire was going downhill, then I assume that the defense, when it is their turn, will have their expert to say it isn't so. What happens here is the idea that, from the prosecution's point of view, is to say that this is why they were scrambling. When the Bashir documentary comes out at the beginning of February, he really is in big trouble.
But address Sean's point real quick, though. How does that translate for the prosecution into a motive for false imprisonment
It can
or child
only
molestation?
translate into false imprisonment. It can't possibly translate into child molestation.
And there's that pesky timing issue. Apparently the child molestation happens post the rebuttal video, if you can follow that. Next, Rudy Provencio, a key player in one of the Michael Jackson business ventures, takes the stand.
What actually did you do during the 2 years of employment in this capacity? What types of things did you do?
Okay, well, I was the general manager of the label of Neverland Valley Entertainment. I oversee the books, not all the books, but a certain major portion of the books. Everything from the task of filing to making sure artists are where they're supposed to be. And doing the things we're supposed to do to get things done, to get the single finished. And to facilitate any other dream or necessity that Michael might have that would fall into us participating with him.
All right.
On that.
You've mentioned Neverland Valley Entertainment. What exactly is Neverland Valley Entertainment?
It's Mark and Michael's company.
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
As the testimony continues, a tale of two bosses and a word you just don't hear in everyday conversation.
All right. What were well, over the next, say, couple of months after you began working in June of '01, did you speak with Mr. Jackson on any kind of regular basis?
Well, we had the studio time, and we'd have our meetings in the studio time, and, you know, there was plenty of filming of that.
Did you have any conversations with him as well?
Yes.
What was Mr. Schaffel's role in this? You were the general manager. What was he?
He was the president of Neverland Valley Entertainment.
As the general manager, did you have access to all of the records that dealt with the expenditures?
Well, they were in a filing cabinet, and I went through all of them, yes.
You read them all?
Well, I read most of them.
As well. It was the two of you. Did you have conversations with Mr. Schaffel about such matters?
Oh, yeah, we talked about things. He was a little bit more braggadocious, but...
Objection. Non-responsive.
Sustained.
Braggadocious?
Yeah, he bragged a lot.
Okay, where's this going?
I just love the whole term of when you get to braggadocious. I mean, it's Bo Dietl speak. Bo Dietl being the famous detective. That's a Bo Dietl word. Bo Dietl speak. Yeah. Where it's going, I assume, because the prosecution wants to rest on a bang, is that this witness overhears something that Schaffel says in a phone conversation. I have to assume that's where it's going.
Right. What say you guys?
I'm too confused.
I'm confused as well, and we all know that there is a primacy.
No, it's just the beginning of his testimony.
And recency. The jury's going to remember what they heard first and what they heard last. If this is the last witness the prosecution has, they better hope that he says something more compelling than what he said so far.
Well, I mean, in fairness, we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
This is very preliminary, but indeed, the prosecution is well served trying to make that connection between Schaffel and company, the other so-called unindicted co-conspirators, and Michael Jackson.
I'm willing to bet that there's not too much testimony from this witness.
Yeah, you're probably right about that, but isn't the point of this witness worthwhile if they can pull it off?
If they can pull it off, but it all goes back to the connection. We have said this from the very beginning. At the close of the prosecution's case, the defense makes the standard motion for a judgment of acquittal, a directed verdict. Yes. And the only chance that they have at that time is going to be on the false imprisonment count. And the question is what Sean and Howard have been raising here for a number of months, which is, can you connect the conduct of the unindicted co-conspirators directly to Mr. Jackson or not?
And will they give us that timeline that we've been chiming for throughout these proceedings? When we return, is Michael Jackson a man of many voices? Stay with us.
The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back. Now, everybody knows the king of pop's voice, right? Well, maybe not. Here's what Rudy Provencio told jurors according to the courtroom transcripts.
During the next couple months, you indicated that you did have meetings with Mr. Jackson. Can you tell us with what level of frequency you would meet with him?
Well, whenever he came to the studio, but sometimes he wouldn't come to the studio. So it was whenever he came into the studio.
And how often might that be?
Boy, the first couple of months, it was pretty regular. I mean, he came in 3 or 4 times a month.
Did you have meetings with him on a regular basis when he came into the studio?
Well, we would talk about the project. How did we think when Michael walks in the door? He's meticulous. I mean, he wants to know everything that's going on and what's happening, and he's a great businessman.
Did you frequently overhear conversations that Mark Schaffel was having with Michael Jackson?
Yes.
Objection, foundation.
Sustained.
Do you know Michael Jackson's voice?
Yes.
Is it fairly distinct?
Well, unless he's upset, then he uses the other voice.
Now, you tell us another voice?
Objection, non-responsive.
Oh.
Sustained.
Have you talked with Mr. Jackson often enough or been present during his conversations that you're able to recognize his voice when he calls?
Michael Jackson's voice is the most distinctive voice in the world, I think.
Objection, non-responsive. Move to strike.
Overruled. Next question.
All right, that means yes, you do know his voice.
Yes.
All right, folks, last go round. What say you?
Well, I want to know if he has 2 voices.
That is really the question. We dealt with that
Howard
earlier
knows.
in
Howard
our
knows.
coverage, Howard.
James.
And you talked to that issue.
James.
Remind us.
Do you realize that this witness established that Michael was a great businessman, so he corroborated Debbie Rowe? I thought that was pretty interesting. Secondly, Michael's not the exorcist, but he does have more than one pitch to his voice.
So is he faking, which was my original question.
His whole life?
In terms of
Is his whole life
this
a fake
voice,
of this voice?
Is it a
No.
a put on?
No.
But,
No, it's not.
But the prosecution, I think, is trying to combat the image that the jurors have of Michael Jackson as this soft-spoken, kind of meek, fragile guy, and then there's the other Michael with the other voice.
Well, he is a singer after all. He has range. I'm not joking about this. I mean, he does have range. He's
being a singer yourself, you know about these things.
Well, I wish I could sing as well as Michael Jackson. I wish I could dance as well as Michael Jackson.
Me too.
Right, but the reality is that he does have range, and I think what we learn from these witnesses is, on the one hand, it may corroborate Gavin's mom that she heard this other voice. Yeah. But the reality is, I still say, to echo my panelists, that's a so what.
Yeah, and what about this last point real quick, guys? He's a good businessman. Doesn't that mean he's in control and knows everything that's going on with his cohorts?
Well, I'm not quite sure what the inference is here.
Well, that's the intended.
Sean, no?
I
think you got to give that up.
No, come on.
It's the intended inference. It doesn't necessarily mean it proves it, but we have to wait for the
end. The prosecution rested their case today. We rest right now to see if they end it with a whimper or a roar. Join us tomorrow, exclusive coverage of the Michael Jackson trial, 7:30 p.m. That's in the evening, right here on E! Okay, last chance. It was a good point, wasn't it?
No.
Yes.
See you tomorrow.